Hey copycat quilters, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about everyone's favorite sewing notion, seam rippers. Not. So they're a necessary evil, we have to have them because hey, we're human and every now and then we might make a mistake, but nobody seems to enjoy using them. Some people call it Jack the Ripper. Some people call it the thing that shall not be named. And I like to think of it as a frog. It teaches you the ribbit stitch. Rip it, rip it, rip it. Get it? I've learned a few tricks along the way to help the chore of seam ripping not be quite so painful. It's not like I'm going to enjoy it anytime soon or look forward to it, but maybe it just won't hurt so bad. So let me show you what I found. So my first tip is get a new seam ripper. We tend to hang onto these things forever and they get little burrs on them. They are a type of blade and they get dull. So every now and then treat yourself to a nice, sharp, fresh seam ripper. I found a seam ripper that I like, and at least that makes it a little easier to do. This one is from Becky at Sewing with Power Tools, and it's nice. It has a stiletto on one end, it has a seam ripper on the other, and it's a nice weight. Her husband makes them, and they're crafted and have little ridges, so it's just really nice that it feels nice in your hand. The only thing about these is they do roll when you put them on the table, but they make a little stand that you can put it on, except I never seem to use that. So I just try to lay mine down beside something that it'll roll into and stop and not roll off the table.
Here I have a little sample that I've sewn together, and I used different colored threads in the bobbin and the top. My bobbin thread is the dark thread, and then my needle thread is the light color. So the first thing you want to do is pick out some of the stitches on the top, the ones that were from the needle thread. So I'm skipping maybe 8, 10, 12 stitches, just kind of breaking that needle thread along the seam line. And I use a really small stitch down at a 2, so those are some tiny stitches. I'm taking my seam ripper and I'm using the back side of it, not the cutting side, and just hold it with my finger, and that entire bobbin thread will just come out. So it took very little pulling. I didn't have to worry about stretching the fabric, and the seam is done. This seam ripper is different from the first one I was showing. This one has little rubber tips. They're kind of like erasers. One thing I don't like is that the cap of this one will not fit back on to the seam ripper, so you just have to lay it aside. So again, I'm breaking the needle threads just every couple of stitches, just a few places along the seam, and then use the back of the seam ripper, not the cutting side, the back. And the bobbin thread will pull out. This one had a little bit of bunching up at the beginning of the seam, but it's still easily pulled out. And you take those little rubber tips from either place, and it's kind of like an eraser. You can use it to brush those little pieces of thread off, and it kind of helps pick them out of the fabric. I think that'd probably be good if you didn't have fingernails, that you'd have a way to get those little threads out. You can see it still kind of took a little bit more work, so I don't use that piece myself very much. So this is a really pretty seam ripper that I got from the channel Power Tools with Thread. It has a seam ripper on one end, and then it has a really nice sharp stiletto on the other end. And they fold in so that you don't have to worry about getting cut. So this is the needle thread on the top, the light color, and then the bobbin thread is the dark. I'm going to cut stitches and make sure to cut 1 or 2 very close to the start, and then just a few down from that. Now this part is not for the faint of heart. We have some graphic videos, so look away if you're easily triggered. But you see I only went about halfway down the seam, and I'm going to pull open that end, jerk, pull apart the seam. And you can see it came easy. It didn't stretch the fabric or anything. You would definitely only do this if it's a straight edge. You would never want to do that on a bias because you will get wavy, wavy fabric.
I don't really enjoy those videos that say you've been doing this wrong your whole life, or, 5 things that you didn't know. But this is something I didn't know for a while, and I guess I had been doing it wrong. So I thought I would share with you. So one thing I'm going to do here is start ripping this seam on one end and kind of get rid of those threads. And we sometimes will do this and pick threads or run this through. Something that I never thought about. This little red ball there is not sharp. It's blunted. A lot of times when I was ripping and I'm doing a seam like this and I'm wanting to run this through, I would put the sharp point in first and have the red on top. And I saw somewhere someone said something about that. This is the blunt end and won't cut your fabric. So you really should put the red ball down in first. And you can use it like that to rip. And you're much less likely to cut your fabric. You can see that is not the normal way that I rip. But since I used the red ball against the fabric instead of the sharp blade, I'm a lot less likely to accidentally rip a big section out of my fabric. So I have to ask, did you learn anything new about ripping out seams? I know learning that trick of cutting the needle thread first and then pulling the bobbin, I don't know why that works so good, because your threads are supposed to be balanced to where they're locking in between the layers of fabric. But hey, that one tip alone is probably worth the amount of time that you spent watching this video. So while we're probably not going to run out anytime soon and sew a bunch of seams just so we can rip them out, maybe it'll be a little less painful for you if you know a few tips to make it easier. Thanks for spending time with me. I hope you go enjoy some of my other videos, and I'll see you next time.